Hello and welcome to Autology, the weekly podcast that brings you the latest on automotive technology. This week's episode is called Letting Go, Consumer Sentiments Towards Automated Driving. And you're here with me, Rebecca Bell-Chambers, as well as Yana Mills, Lead Analyst for Consumer Insights, alongside Brock Walkhorst, Senior Analyst for Autonomy. Thank you both for joining me and welcome to Autology.
Thanks for having us.
Excited to be here.
Thanks. So this week's podcast is all about consumer sentiments towards automated driving and autonomy. So the first question that I have for you guys is maybe if you could give us some background insights into what the industry defines automated driving as.
Sure, and I think this will be a good place for me to step in. So as the industry looks at it, and especially as we look at it at S&P Global, ADAS is often considered level 0 and level 1 features, such as automatic emergency braking, blind spot systems, adaptive cruise control would fall under that level 1 category. But where things really start digging into automated driving is level 2 and level 3 systems, systems that are controlling latitudinal and longitudinal movements of the vehicle. So combinations of adaptive cruise control and lane centering. And the big difference between level 2 and level 3 being who's ultimately responsible for control of the vehicle. Where level 2 is all on the driver to be engaged in the loop, and level 3 kind of situational autonomy, where the driver is able to, I guess, disengage from the driving process, but also be ready to step back in if a system is unfamiliar with some sort of circumstance on the road. So these level 2 plus, which is more industry defined, and level 3 is really where automated driving hones in to the industry.
Okay, great. So that's really helpful to have that context. So thank you for that. So I know that you run a global consumer survey on this topic as well. So could you give us some information on what are some of the consumer sentiments around this technology, and specifically more around automated driving features?
Yeah, well, to start, the results from this year are looking more positive with regard to desirability overall. In fact, desirability for automated and autonomous driving features has risen from about 50% in the last iteration that we ran in 2020 to a minimum of 60% in 2022. And so it makes sense because it seems to align with some of that increased availability of these types of systems from some of the major OEMs, which obviously helps to familiarize the consumers with the technologies and the functionalities. What's interesting, though, is, and somewhat consistent with earlier iterations of the survey, is the level 2 and level 2 plus features that Brock mentioned scored higher than level 3 variants. And in general, consumers' desirability scores decreased in correlation to their associated autonomy levels. And so the higher the level of automation, the less consumers liked and wanted it. So features like highway automated driving, city automated driving scored higher than the unsupervised versions of those tech. And it could be that consumers are intuitively or intuiting these changes in functionality, the higher the autonomy. More generally, though, while global males and female desirabilities were pretty near even, results did show that women were more likely to find each feature very desirable, but it was men who were more willing to pay extra for them. And on that note of willingness to pay, consumers did tend to correlate cost and functionality, and generally are willing to pay higher prices the more advanced the function is. And we found that average prices that consumers were willing to pay for some of those features were typically around $680 to $700, but it did vary by country. So like German respondents, along with the Chinese and Americans, were willing to pay the most compared to those in Japan, the UK, and some of the other countries that we fielded in. And so this is looking specifically at those level 2, 2 plus, L3 features.
And I know one thing that really makes sense with this, Yana, and you mentioned as system functionality and ultimately, unsupervised driving situations, as that level of automation increases, consumer sentiment might decrease a little bit. And I know I generally touched on some level 2 and level 3, I guess, details in the first part of this. I think some of the big hurdles there are level 2 plus and level 3. You're ultimately enabling extended eyes on, hands off driving in level 2 plus, and in level 3, eyes off, hands off driving. And so those are some big hurdles. Those both of those levels and both of those types of systems are also including driver monitoring cameras, something that is becoming more available, but is still fairly niche in the industry. So I think those types of things, as consumers are ultimately able to get more familiar with these, Super Cruise like systems that we see from Cadillac and spreading throughout the General Motors lineup. We see Ford coming in with Blue Cruise. We see Stellantis stepping in with their highway driving assist system, introduced on the Jeep Grand Cherokee and Grand Wagoneer. As these systems become more and more available, I think we'll start to see some of the hesitation that currently exists for level 2 plus and level 3 start to ease a bit. And I think the systems that I mentioned, all available in North America, the United States specifically, we see regulation catching up in Europe as well to make these level 2 plus and level 3 systems available. So, as regulation, as technology, all of these things that cohesively work together to bring this technology to the market, we're getting to a point where I think it's fair to expect markets such as Germany, China, America, that had respondents that were willing to pay the most. And I think, that's typically a pretty good indicator of interest in the system. I would expect those markets to definitely be on the rise for making these level 2 plus and level 3 systems available now, and also, increasingly in the near future.
Sure. Okay, there's some interesting insights there. So what about the kind of more higher levels of automation? Perhaps you could talk more about this kind of level 4, level 5 from both a technology and a consumer standpoint.
Yeah, this is always an interesting one, and I think it's a benchmark that the industry has continued to step away from a bit, as level 4 autonomy seemed like something, when talked about 5 years ago, that was very attainable, I wouldn't say easy, but something that, didn't seem like as much of a challenge as it has turned out to be. And these level 4 systems currently, they're few and far from in between. Waymo has a test system out in Phoenix, Arizona, and there are many others that have these kind of test like programs around the country, around the world. But otherwise, as far as being mainstream to consumers, there's really nothing out there. And it goes to the ultimate, challenge of taking a driver completely out of the loop and having these mobility as a service concept vehicles around, almost functioning as Ubers, but not having an Uber driver there to pick you up. So I think mobility as a service would be where we really expect to see a level 4 system come to market. And both from a technology and consumer standpoint, there seems to be quite a few more challenges to overcome. I think in the next couple of years, we'll start to see some systems and some services become available in very isolated cities. Maybe Route A to Route B type scenarios. But otherwise, I think as far as getting technology up to speed with all of the different things that can happen in city environments, urban environments, and highway environments, and also getting consumers on board to, be okay not having a driver taking them from one place to another. Definitely things to work on. But Jana, I'm curious, what did consumers think about this in the survey that you've talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you mentioned, just the fact that there isn't as much exposure, kind of is is shown in our survey. From the consumer perspective, I'll just reiterate what I said earlier with that correlation between desirability and the levels of autonomy. Higher levels, scored lower in desirability, which is consistent with what we found in the previous version of the survey in 2020 as well. This is not at all surprising and certainly understandable. Like I said, given the limited or the lack of exposure that consumers have to these higher levels of automation. So there's definitely skepticism both in the technology and maybe how it relates to their own driving experience, right? And so this was pretty consistent across all the countries that we fielded in. But it was a few that stood out with European respondents in the UK and Germany, along with the US. They appeared to be the most skeptical, especially for something like self-driving car, right, which is categorized in that L4 and L5 space. But when it comes to willingness to pay, consumers were most willing to pay extra for something like self-driving car and higher prices for that matter. On average, globally, respondents were willing to pay about $925 for this feature, and Germans were well above this average, willing to pay just around $1,400 for self-driving car. And there's still a bit of a gap, obviously, though, between what consumers are willing to pay and what some of these options actually cost in the market. But this, again, kind of goes back to the trust that consumers have in the technology. Ultimately, our survey found that consumers were more likely to trust automakers that are perhaps already known for something like quality and reliability, durability over other developers like technology companies. To be able to develop a safe and effective autonomous vehicle. So it's automakers like the German premium automakers, Audi, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, along with Japanese automakers that were rated highest in confidence for this. But I think you're absolutely right, Brock, where you mentioned that mobility as a service is kind of where the biggest opportunity is here to get that exposure.
Sure. And just going back to that point regarding, the level of trust when it comes to European and specifically UK respondents, I can speak for myself being based in the UK, it's almost like a fear of the unknown. We don't know, we don't have much exposure of this. So it makes perfect sense when you're getting these responses in the consumer surveys. So that's really quite interesting. But it appears consumers may not be so quick to accept these higher levels of automation just yet. So what are OEMs doing from a technology or a strategy implementation standpoint as they work towards new feature and new technology introductions?
Yeah, I think what we continue to see here in the United States and, what continues to happen globally is just wider availability of systems. When, for example, Mercedes is first to market with a level 3 system, their Highway Pilot system on the S-Class and EQS. And, it's a phenomenal accomplishment. But, when you're selling a system like that, that's, only available on an S-Class and EQS, it's very limited exposure. And we've seen that historically with Cadillac as well when they introduced Super Cruise in the United States in the 2017-2018 timeline. Single vehicle availability, a CT6, a very high priced vehicle at the time. But now, we're seeing some movement downstream, I'd say. So continuing to make these systems available on vehicles that are at a price level that, many customers can access them, while also, continuing to show safety capabilities of these vehicles. I think often no press is good press for these types of systems, creates a bit less hesitation, especially when it comes to these level 2+ and level 3 systems where the driver is taking their hands off the wheel. I know there's quite a bit more in the advertising department going on, just showing, these eyes on, hands off systems and really trying to promote, one, the technology capabilities of the system, but also the safety and trust that consumers are having, especially for systems that have been in the market for 4 or 5 years now. So I think those kind of things are really playing in, and, the longer these systems are on the market, I think the more vehicles that they're ultimately getting on, I think automakers are going to continue to lean into that, and kind of, let consumers try it for themselves. And that's much easier to do when it's not just on a flagship model.
Right. Yeah. And trust is everything. Trust in the technology will take time as it continues to evolve and improve. But yeah, automakers and suppliers have been strategically positioning themselves to introduce that partial or conditional autonomy via some of these automated driving systems. So, a fundamental element of these systems is where they're being used, which is also related to the hardware and the software that's fit to the vehicle. So we found that highway driving is most common, with more urban scenarios coming in future launches. But an interesting result that we found in this year's survey is that respondents are just more open to conditional autonomy in general. Another interesting result is on the topic of those driver monitoring systems. As our survey results found that respondents were more likely to use an automated driving system with a driver monitoring system that could perhaps serve as a backup to help warn the driver to resume control. And this backup is likely a comfort to consumers, and they're willing to accept it despite it being a feature that many might find invasive. So including driver monitoring systems as part of those, more advanced feature systems may help increase adoption of more advanced functions.
Sure. Okay, so just before we wrap up today's episode, on the topic of OEM strategy, when it comes to driver assistant technologies and vehicle technologies in general, over-the-air updates are sure to influence the user experience in many ways. So how do you expect to see consumers to respond to this capability, and what does it mean for the technology adoption?
So this is actually a topic that we don't cover in the autonomous driving and ADAS survey, but it is part of one of our other surveys for connected car. This survey looks at satisfaction with connected services and paid functional updates, as well as feature desirability and the willingness to pay for them. And what we found was, even with a different sample of respondents, compared to the ADAS survey, desirability was still very similar to that of the ADAS and autonomous driving survey. We talked about those higher levels of autonomy and the less desirable the feature was. So we looked at 3 over-the-air ADAS features. Interestingly, one of them was Driving Pilot. That one made it into the top 5 most desired over-the-air features. And this is out of approximately 19 paid functional updates, I believe. But the other, which was full autonomous driving capability, was second from the bottom. But those who did want an ADAS feature as an over-the-air update preferred to purchase it as an annual subscription. So overall, like I said, the results are still quite similar to those in the ADAS survey relating to the levels of autonomy. But it may be that allowing some of these features as optional updates that can be purchased and obviously, stopped at any time as an annual subscription may help increase exposure to that technology and hopefully improve perception of it as well.
Sure. Okay, so great, and thank you to you guys. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for. So as I say, a big thank you to both of you for joining me on Autology. And thank you to our listeners as well for tuning in. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode at our autology@spglobal.com email. And you can find out much more at autotechinsight.ihsmarket.com. Don't forget to hit all of the subscribe, follow and like buttons to stay on track with the latest Autology episodes. And we look forward to you joining us again in the next episode. Bye for now.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.